another one of the important issues that hangs in the balance as the result of election 2016 is Social Security. And here to talk about that with us now is our friend and associate producer, Linda Benesch, who is the communications director for Social Security Works, which is fighting to protect and expand that program. So, Linda, first of all, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me on, Richard.
So, okay, we were all together for part of election night. I think by the time you left, the surprise twist ending hadn't happened yet. But now here we are a week later, and as we look back and try to gather our thoughts about this election that just took place, what do you think the Democrats, how do you think they handled the Social Security issue? What did they do right? What maybe could they have done better?
So one thing that I think is really striking, Richard, is that we're hearing a heck of a lot more about Social Security and especially Medicare from both the media and from Democrats in the week since the election than we did during pretty much the entire actual election cycle. And that's the result of some developments since the election. As I know you've discussed with one of your other guests, we had some very worrying and horrifying comments from Speaker Paul Ryan last week, indicating that he wants to go ahead with his plan to privatize Medicare. We had some of the leaders in the movement to privatize Social Security appointed to Trump transition team. And so all of a sudden, people are talking about Social Security and Medicare. But the thing is, none of this should come as a surprise to anyone who is paying attention. That plan to voucherize Medicare has been in Ryan's budget for years. Those people who want to privatize Social Security have worked with all kinds of Republican administrations. And so Democrats should have talked about these things during the election, not just afterwards.
Yeah, you know, I think there are a couple reasons why that didn't happen, but it's a great point, Linda. I think one was, of course, this was more of a personality-driven election. Two, I would have to say I think the Clinton campaign made the decision to make the election about Donald Trump, and perhaps in retrospect they should have emphasized some of the issues where Democrats should have the advantage politically if they take the right stand, like Social Security. And I think the third, and we've talked about this a lot, we talked about it with Nancy Altman, the director of Social Security last week, but Social Security Works last week. But the third piece, and I do think this is important, is that I think Trump misled the people, didn't he? Because he said he didn't want to cut Social Security, and now he's put the people who hate it the most and want to cut it the most seemingly in charge of the transition process and making appointments to the Social Security Administration. And of course, the whole Republican Party, aside from Trump, is open about their desire to cut it, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Richard. I think Trump, was just blatantly lying for the whole campaign, and nobody really challenged him on the contradiction between his stated views and the views of Speaker Ryan and the Republican Party. I mean, our organization at Social Security Works, we were working very hard. We were putting out a lot of blog posts. We were trying, as best as we could to inject that narrative into the media. We had a petition before the debates that said, ask Donald Trump if he would sign Social Security cuts if Speaker Paul Ryan sent them to his desk. But the media had to talk about emails. They had to have some room in the debate for inane debt fear-mongering. And so nobody wanted to talk about this, and neither, unfortunately, did the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. Democrats, because, of course, it wasn't just that Hillary Clinton lost. It was that Democrats did not take control of the Senate. They lost gubernatorial races. They lost on the Senate side. Of course, they didn't take back the House of Representatives, of course, which is heavily gerrymandered against them. I think they gained 6 seats, if I recall correctly. But they did not get where they needed to be overall in the down-ballot races either, where my sense is Social Security could have really helped them as an issue.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I would say I do want to give the Democrats credit where credit is due. In this campaign, the Democratic Party, from President Obama to Hillary Clinton on down, united around expanding and not cutting Social Security benefits. So that was the right step, but then unfortunately they didn't really take the next step and make sure that voters actually knew about it by talking about it. And part of that is on the media, but part of that is also on Democrats. I don't think there was a single ad for Hillary that mentioned her support of expanding Social Security or mentioned Social Security at all, for that matter. And then in some of the competitive Senate races, you did see ads about Social Security, but they were pretty much all focused on the privatization angle. They didn't say anything about no cuts. They didn't say anything about expansion. And even the ads about privatization felt very theoretical, like, oh, they support this terrible thing. But they didn't really make it sound like something that could actually happen. You know, have a picture of Speaker Ryan up there next to Senator Toomey, and say, if you vote for Senator Toomey, your Social Security is going to be privatized.
Right. I think that's very true. And, I would add to that they also didn't make it. Senior voters, older voters vote a lot in large numbers, turn out. They only vote once. Voter fraud isn't a thing. But they do turn out in large numbers. And to senior voters over 65s and so on, people on Social Security, the lack of a Social Security benefit increase and then the smallness of the increases that have come through, that's a very real thing for them too. So if Democrats have been willing to talk about the fact that you're not getting enough in your Social Security paycheck, it didn't get increased, there were these years nothing happened when your prices are going up, and even when there was a price increase, it was not compared to what you're spending just to get by. I think that would have hit people right where they live with a problem they can really identify with.
Democrats have over a dozen bills in Congress to expand Social Security, which includes several bills that would change the way that cost of living increases are calculated to reflect the real cost that seniors face. But I bet if there had been an exit poll that asked voters how many of them knew about that, it would probably be under 5%. But for what it's worth, though, Democrats' share of the over 65 vote actually did increase by about 5%, according to exit polls. So maybe that was the 5%. But I do think that by really talking about this and making it a major issue in the election, Democrats could have done a lot better because, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, right, they're all absolutely horrifying, and unfortunately some voters may have voted based on that, but a lot of voters vote with their pocketbook, and Democrats didn't make this an election about pocketbook issues.
Yeah, I completely agree. And by the way, not only do a lot of voters vote based on pocketbook issues, but a lot of voters stay home if they don't hear anybody talking about the issues that affect their life permanently. So, okay, the Democrats, let's say they did some things right, certainly on the content. Those bills you described, some of them are absolutely terrific, including Elizabeth Warren's bill to give Social Security recipients as big a boost in income as America's wealthiest CEOs and so on. A lot of great bills out there. They didn't talk about them. There was some talk, as you say, in the down ballot races. Maybe that helped. Hillary Clinton did sign on to the concept of expanding Social Security, said President Obama. Maybe in retrospect, Hillary Clinton, I think I said it at the time too, but maybe she would have been stronger if she'd said for everyone instead of limiting it. But okay, so here we are. We can't rewrite the past. What do you think is going to happen going forward? We're talking now about Paul Ryan, Speaker Ryan is talking about cutting Medicare. What about Social Security in the next 2 to 4 years?
So I think that on Social Security and Medicare, there's really two questions that are going to shape what the next few years look like. And one of them is just how stupid is Speaker Ryan, or politically suicidal, if you want to put it another way. Because if he actually goes ahead with trying to voucherize Medicare, basically giving seniors a coupon that's worth far less than what Medicare would give them instead of their earned Medicare benefits, I think that the Republican Party is going to get completely eviscerated in the following elections. It'll be a disaster, at least as bad as Bush's plan to privatize Social Security and maybe worse. And I do feel relatively confident that as horrifying and terrifying as that plan is, the American people of all political affiliations are going to successfully be able to rally and fight that. But there are also some other options that Ryan has to cut Medicare, but do it in a somewhat less drastic and more underhanded fashion. And that's something I think we can talk a little bit more about on future shows, and some other guests can address as well. But it would involve basically weighting the way that the government pays traditional Medicare versus the private Medicare Advantage plans, so that almost everybody switches to Medicare Advantage instead. But Speaker Ryan, he's very ideologically driven. I think he really wants to privatize as much as possible and as fast as possible, and so it's quite possible that he really will overreach. And then with Social Security, there's been less indicators so far, but based on the folks that Trump has appointed to his transition team, I think that we definitely need to be worried for Social Security's future as well. And also, another important but underrated issue is the budget of the Social Security Administration, which has already been cut a lot by the Republican Congress in recent years, which makes it much harder for people to access their own benefits, and which is bound to be under siege in the next 4 years.
Oh, it seems clear by the people they've chosen. It's like putting Darth Vader in charge of the Rebel Alliance. But and on top of that, we're going to have what I predict is more of the Republican strategy, which is they cut the administrative benefit. I'm sorry, the administrative budget. Even though Social Security is very efficiently administered, they cut the budget so that there are long phone waiting times, long in-person waiting times, no offices near where people live, and so on. And then they use that to say, you see, government can't do anything. And then they want to give it to private corporations that charge 5 times as much to do half as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is an especially dangerous time for them to be doing that because we're having millions more baby boomers entering the system every year. And so the Social Security Administration's budget is being slashed even as the clientele base grows. And if I have to make a prediction, I think that they're going to declare war on the Social Security Administration in the first term, try to foment public anger against it without blaming themselves, and then if, God forbid, there's a second Trump term, I think that's when they would try to privatize Social Security as a response to that.
Well, I'm not entirely convinced there's going to be a complete Trump first term because I think he's flirting with impeachment given his past record. And I'm talking about impeachment from a Republican Congress, but that's just my theory. We'll wait and see, please. The second Trump administration. Perish the thought, as the old people used to say. So, all right, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Linda Benesch, Communication Director for Social Security Works and Associate Producer for the Zero Hour, thanks for staying on top of this issue, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard.